Doufám, že se nám během minimálně tady toho dopoledne, ale možná i zbytku konference bude dařit, možná tu imaginaci nějakým způsobem rozšiřovat a opravdu přemýšlet nad tom nejen, co je špatně, ale naopak společně formulovat, jak bychom to chtěli. A doufám, že se to podaří i během následujícího panelu, protože se jmenuje Ekologická krize a sociální otázka. Jak naplnit potřeby všech v ekologických mezích. Dnes vlastně žijeme ve světě, kde potřeby všech naplněné nejsou a přesto vlastně ještě překračujeme i ty planetární meze. Takže pokud chceme dospět k nějakému světu, který tento cíl naplnit potřeby všech v ekologických mezí, pokud k němu chceme dospět, je dobrý se ho nějakým způsobem nejdřív začít představovat. A proto bych rád přivítal Jožku Patočku, který bude moderovat i tento panel. Ostatní nebude moderovat všechny panely, můžete se těšit i na ostatní moderátory, pro ty, co tady byli včera. A pro ty, co nebyli, tak Jožka Patočka je momentálně v Brně, působí v organizaci Reset, je taky v nerůstové pracovní skupině a třeba píše do deníku Referendum o hlavně klimatické krizi, možných řešeních i třeba nerůstu. A už asi nechám na něj, aby pak představil zbytek panelu. A jak říkala Anna, jedna z těch hodnot vlastně této konference, na kterou se chceme dívat, na kterou chceme citlivovat, je vědomá práce s mocí. A my vlastně máme zkušenost, ale je to i ze všech mezinárodních konferencí a tak dále, že většinou se otázky ptají prostě nejčastěji muži, ty výrazní, který mají dostatek sebevědomí na to se je ptát. A my bychom teďka u tady ty panelové diskuze chtěli zkusit trochu jiný formát. Já teď přemýšlím, kde je Anička. Jo, super. Ten formát bude, že tady budeme mít v prostoru vlastně papíry a pera. A pokud budete mít otázku kdykoliv během toho panelu, tak můžete přijít vlastně, vzít si papír a tužku a napsat váš dotaz, dát ho do tašky a my nakonec budeme losovat, které otázky vlastně vybereme. Umožňuje to dvě věci. Jednak lidem, kterých otázka by jinak nezazněla, protože se třeba bojí mluvit do mikrofonu pro všechny, tak aby se mohli vlastně zapojit tímto způsobem. A taky k tomu, aby dotazy nezabíraly 10 minut, protože častokrát nejsou dotazy, ale jsou to spíše komentáře. Možná i u dalších panelů budeme třeba experimentovat s novými formáty, ale během této panelové diskuze pak vyzkoušíme formát tento.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. So this is the panel on the ecological crisis and the social question, and that means you could say the grand question of degrowth. Like, if degrowth wants to create an economy that meets people's needs inside of ecological boundaries, the question that arises obviously is how to do it and why it's so hard today. And possibly one of the answers to this is that historically in the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century you had the debate about the so-called social question, like how do we meet everyone's needs? And who should, it was also like who should the economy belong to? Should the big factories be still owned by private owners, or should they belong to the people who work in them, and so on? So the solution historically that was found to this, to a large extent, was growth. And you could explain growth historically as an emergent property of this conflict where to summarize, to put it simply, the have-nots, the working people have agreed that the owners would still own the bakery in exchange for getting a larger piece of the pie, and getting a larger piece of the pie meant making the pie larger for everybody. So growth was the answer. And today, growth is more of a problem than an answer to anything, largely because of the ecological crisis. So the social question basically arises again as a social and ecological question of how do we meet needs in ecological boundaries. And I will, we will discuss this question today with our guests, who are Nina Troy from Conceptwerk Neue Ökonomie, an economist, activist, and also politician. You could say from some perspective, or a candidate in the last Bundestag elections in Germany for the left party, Die Linke. Also Julia Moskvina, who is a sociologist by education, but today mainly an organizer in the housing right to housing movement, who has came from the founding meeting of the Tenants Initiative in Prague yesterday, which, as I have heard, was a big success. Lucie Trlifajová, who is an anthropologist and an, I would say, a prominent expert in the Czech social system, and one of the authors of the Czech concept and calculation of the minimum decent wage or living wage. And Ondřej Kolínský, who is an ecological economist, also focusing on issues of work, of labor, of regional development in connection to solutions to the climate crisis. And so we have asked our guests to prepare an opening statement on the big question, how to meet needs in ecological boundaries. And so I will give space to them now, starting with Nina.
Good morning, everyone. Very nice to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. I didn't make it yesterday, sorry. The train ride was actually quite long. I was surprised. So I hope I don't repeat anything that you already heard in this very good introduction yesterday. There's 3 parts that you asked us. The first one was, is there enough to meet everyone's needs? And obviously the answer is yes. There is enough on this planet to meet everyone's needs, but not to meet everyone's greeds, as Gandhi already put it nicely, and I think that's the whole point. You already said that the whole story of growth and why workers and people who are not as privileged in the system agreed to it was that we thought of an ever-growing cake, and then our little piece that we had was also growing. But now that the cake has grown to its end, or actually we see that the cake in the global north is made out of a lot of extraction and bad conditions in the global south, we realize that our part of the cake is maybe not right and in multiple senses, and so we have to think about the redistribution of the cake. And I think it's very important in this aspect to talk about needs, because capitalism creates a lot of needs. We need big cars, we need new smartphones, we need private pools, I don't know, kind of that thing. So it's really important to talk what are the needs that we actually have to satisfy. And obviously that's one of the points that degrowth often gets criticized about, because they say, well, you want to go back to some, whatever, Stone Age, where we only have the basic needs. And that is a problem, that we don't have an imagination, connecting to what you said about how could an equal distribution of things and services, goods and services, look around the world, and where would we end with? And maybe start with that. Now the distribution of the economy is that way that 8 men, it's obviously men, it's not some other gender, have as much as the 8 richest men as 50% of the world population. I mean, that is, I think that number is just totally crazy. And those people doubled their wealth into 18 months of the corona pandemic, while the people who were hungry grew by 50% as well. So it's just about the distribution of all those things. And so if we think about redistribution, I think we have to think about those terms. If we want to satisfy everyone's needs, take of those who satisfy now the highest greeds. And within a degrowth consideration, I would say, well, if we talk about what people actually need, we would end up with not everyone in the global north, in Europe, having a car, a TV, plane travels, a couple of things a year. So things that are now considered very desirable, normal, necessary in our countries. And the problem is that we don't have any democratic discussion about those needs. There's something missing. And the question is also, if we talk about goods and services that we provide to everyone, where do they come from? And for now, a lot of things are shipped around the whole world. So we have tomatoes and jeans and all kinds of things shipped around the whole world. So within a degrowth vision where you satisfy everyone's needs, we would think about more local and regional economies, about small-scale agriculture, and only things traded and produced on a global level that really need global cooperation. So, for example, medicaments or high technology we use for the few phones we still have. And I think one important aspect in that is that there is still a lot of livelihoods that feed on a small-scale agriculture, on subsistence agriculture in local and regional economies, but they are destroyed by industrialization and by land grabbing and by what you can also call the original enclosures that we also had in Europe. So people feeding off land, not having land titles on them, but grazing livestock there or just farming there, and then some government or some companies somewhere deciding they need to put some plant there, and they construct some, I don't know, car factory there, and then people lose their land, and they actually become laborers and workers and have to work there. And so if we think about the ways we combat capitalism, it's not only about talking about the industry we have in the global north, but also talking about the industrialization process we find in the south now, and how it destroys the very livelihoods we would need to sustain. And coming back to this original question, do we have enough to satisfy everyone's needs? That is exactly the problem with climate change and the climate catastrophe, that now we could theoretically say, yeah, we have enough, and there's enough food and shelter and electricity and all the goods we produce in the world, but that's more and more getting difficult within the climate catastrophe. And so if we don't stop that and now think about degrowth measures to get there, it will be even much harder. Which then leads to the second question you had, which was about why do social and ecological politics often contradict each other, and why do they often have different players fighting for them? So we have strong social unions and social parties, and we have the strong environmental movement and green parties, but they hardly ever work together. And if they work together, I don't know what it's like in the Czech Republic, but in Germany we have this now called progressive coalition of the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Liberals. And then when they work together, their consensus is a green growth consensus. So they don't talk about the ecological limits and about global inequality and colonialism, but they talk about the system in which we find ourselves. And they forget about three basic things, or they don't understand three basic things about this greening of capitalism. So the first story is that the whole story about greening the economy and greening capitalism is about changing the resources that we put in, right? So we now put in fossil energy, and afterwards we put in renewable energy. And we don't talk about the fact that we don't have enough renewable energies to feed our high demand of energy. And that is eaten up by all the efficiency gains we all ever had. So they don't understand the efficiency gains are eaten up. And so if you green everything and only set your plans on technology and efficiency, this will be eaten up itself. And they don't talk about relocation processes. So it's, again, this problem of considering the whole aspect of it, thinking about the economy in a worldwide sense or only in a local sense. And obviously then we can say, for example, the Czech or the German or the Spanish industry got much cleaner, but now the dirty processes are in India, China, or Bangladesh or somewhere else. So where do the dirty processes go? And the third part of it is the magnitude of climate change and also of all the other catastrophes. So thinking that our economy could still continue to grow, but the resource input and the emissions will decline, thinking about the decoupling, they always think about decoupling in a relative way. So the economy keeps growing and the emissions also keep growing, but not as high. But bringing that together with our reduction of the energy, our reduction of energy and emissions that we have to do in order to stay within the 1.5 or 2 degrees limit, which is like 80 or 90% in the global north, that doesn't work. And so for my consideration, if you combine social and ecological politics, mostly they come around with green growth and they don't think about these ecological limits, or they put in place ecological policies that don't think of the social side. And I don't know what the debate is like in the Czech Republic, but in Germany, for example, for now, there's really, like, with the rising of the gas prices, the energy prices has skyrocketed, and there's really people waiting for like extra payings of energy for like 800 euros, 1,000 euros, a lot of households that can't pay that. And the Social Democrats are in power, and they don't make a plan on how those people will pay their energy. So there's going to be energy poverty in Germany with a social democratic and green government. It's totally crazy. Like even if I didn't think that they would come around with a solution about growth, I thought at least they would have some solutions for the very basic problems to come. I know how long I've been talking. I have a third part, which are the solutions. Should I do that or later?
I think we can get to the solutions later, if you don't mind.
Yeah, okay. So thanks.
And I will now switch to to Julia.
Yeah, okay, this is the first picture actually. Because I wanted to start on a small note on the name of this panel, which is called Ecological Crisis and Social Question, and which I usually and very often presented as separated things. And this is exactly how we usually see ecological crisis, and this is what we perceive usually when we speak about social crisis. But in the reality, of course, these things are super connected. And I think that this conference is exactly important for us in a sense that we can develop new vocabulary on how we actually perceive both crises coming together, and we see very common terms like climate justice or just transition, like everyone heard, I think, here, but also affordable housing for degrowth municipalism, politicized social metabolism in the cities, and other like social ecology or eco-socialism. So in this sense, I think this is one of the tasks of this conference, also to overcome this distinction. And of course, with this political framework of this political task, it is important to think about the needs. And when we imagine capitalism, we imagine this. We imagine capitalism as some sort of machinery of production of meaningful needs and meaningful desires and some sort of artificial ways of fulfilling these needs. For example, okay, capitalism says to us, you must buy more. You must have money on your account, but actually when you have money on your account, you're looking for security and control over your life. This is your need, but in capitalist order, we can fulfill this need only by this way. And then we have this luxury house and SUV cars, which became a target recently of many climate activists. What is this? It is a need of recognition. We really need it, and in capitalism, this is only one way how we make it. To be recognized by a member of society, we need to have this and also money to feel secure. And I think that from our position as a left movement or as left politicians or parties, we can actually think how from our position we can fulfill these needs in a different way. And how indeed we're speaking about some idea of good life for all, which is not based on commodification, extraction of value, accumulation of wealth. What is indeed the idea of good life we're speaking about, which is accessible to all people when their basic needs are met, and they feel recognized, they feel secure, and they feel having control over their life or what is going on in their lives. And of course, in general, to answer the question of Joseph, I think that yes, we can fulfill all needs of all people, but I maybe think more in the strategical terms, because what kind of a political project we are making if we are telling people that we cannot do it? Of course, we must tell people that we can do it, and I think that we can. And because I'm coming from the housing perspective, I just made some sketch of some ideas how we can think about housing, affordable housing for the growth, and how we can think about the needs that I mentioned before, which is security and recognition and control over the life, but also the basic need of being accommodated somewhere. So on the left side, we see basically housing in capitalism, and we see very common narrative in capitalism, how we secure the basic need for housing. We build more. In the Czech Republic, it's a very strong narrative. Publicly, there is almost no alternative to this narrative. It is very hard to break through this narrative. And even on the left, we can hear the same thing. We must build more to accommodate people. Our cities must always grow. But we might also want to think from the point of view of housing for the growth, and to think about, for example, redistributive access to housing, which might be done, for example, with a means of progressive tax on the real estate. So basically, the more flats you have, the more you pay, because there is a high probability that the rest of your flats, except the one where you live, you use either for investment or to rent to someone for a lot of money, or Airbnb, and stuff like this. Then we can also think about relocation, including requisition, which is going on actually now in Berlin. There is a strong push to try to make a requisition of big developers into the common ownership of municipality. We might also speak about reallocation in a sense when we even see the statistic for the European Union, when there are 11 millions of empty houses, and there are 700,000 of homeless people. So with a very easy mathematics, we can put these two numbers together, and we can see that we can accommodate all homeless people in Europe just now if we try to make some good politics of reallocation. And another thing, of course, that maybe we don't have to demolish all the buildings and to build new, but try to invest money in refurbishment. Then I was talking about the need for security and feeling of control. And again, in capitalist narrative, how you feel secure in your life. This world is very unsecure. You actually feel security only if you have money, and especially if you invest in private property. But in the growth narrative, we can speak about protection of the classes who are suffering the most in the system. In our case, it is tenants, and this is a group of people with whom we are working. We can think about some measures like, for example, ban on chaining agreements or rent cap. We can support some stable social housing. And there are some ideas, for example, if we are into a topic of imagination, there are some ideas as universal social housing, which are coming from a Scottish organization, which is called Living Rent. So they perceive social housing and demand in social housing like something which is universal basic income. It is something that is guaranteed for all. Social housing is a public service, just like education and healthcare. Of course, we can think about supporting diversified types of housing. And then on the level of recognition, on the level of need to be actually someone in this society, again, in capitalism, we can own luxury apartment and SUV cars, but in the growth world, we can actually use housing models that deepen democracy and change the way of interrelating with one another, and when we feel recognized as community members, but when we also make some sort of democratic management of communities where we live and democratic management of the houses where we live. So we can actually feel that we have control over what's going on in our lives because we can make politics just on spot and have actually some influence. And we can use housing for that. We can think about housing projects that enable this and cover the need of recognition. And of course, here we can speak about shared resources, which is much more ecologically efficient in the case of community projects. And how to make it? I just make this very strange slide, which comes from the ideas of organizational ecology, which means that there are a lot of different actors with different ideas, different goals, and different roles in our society are making the move all together. And what is more important than these actors themselves, I think, is coordination between them. And I think what is really often forgotten in the discussions about degrowth is the role of popular classes in what we are speaking about today, because many people are living in the situation of, let's say, degrowth now. They are already saving money, cannot use so many resources as others because they are poor. And how we are, I think these people are not here now. Where are they? Why they are not here? They should be here. And of course, what is important for this idea of social change is that we have some certain political moments. And in terms of housing in the Czech Republic, this political moment, especially in Prague, is coming now because it is simply so expensive that it's not possible to live in this city anymore. That's it. I will end with this very bad note.
Thank you, Julia, for a crash course on the housing crisis and its solutions and how it's connected to overcoming growth capitalism. I will now turn to Lucie, who, as I mentioned, is one of the authors of the minimum living wage calculations for Czech Republic. And my question, perhaps, in terms of redistributing incomes, maybe in reaction to what the previous speakers have said, there's also the question of how we can make the discussion about meeting needs not only about incomes, perhaps, but in terms of that income perhaps is only one way of meeting needs and only one part of the problem. But also, how is it with incomes in Czech Republic in terms of meeting needs?
Yeah. Okay, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for this opportunity to meet with all of you. I have few points. Maybe I will return to your original question, and because when I was preparing for this debate, I was thinking about the question: is it even possible to meet everyone's needs? And then I said, okay, similar to other people, of course it is. And what kind of movement or what kind of perspective are we proposing if we don't trust it in ourselves? But on the other hand, as a researcher, I was saying, okay, but as a researcher, I don't really know. I don't really have evidence about our ability to do so in the current context. And why I have to say this, I don't know, from one point of view is there's the question, how do we define the needs, which, I've forgotten your name, sorry. Nina already spoke about, so I will not get into this point. But the other point I wanted to emphasize, why I would say I don't know, is that we, as a society, kind of lost the ability to try. So in a way, we kind of, in a public policy, I think it was also already mentioned also in the debate about the current situation in Germany, but we also observe it in the current debate about energetic poverty, or the impact of rapid inflation in the Czech context, that we are not used to speak about the impact of the development or changes in the society on the society as a whole. There was this premise, which was closely linked to the growth discourse or growth narrative, that the growth itself will promise a better life for all. So we are not really used to measure or think about how the people are living, or if the people are living good lives. We are not really that much used to speak about inequality, quality of life, quality of work, but usually what we are used to do is to measure poverty or social exclusion. So if we look on the comparison of the quality of life or the social situation, for example, in the EU country, the most used measures are how many people are at risk of poverty, of social exclusion, how many people are unemployed. So we are usually tend to focus on a very small group of people, so we don't really want to see people on the streets. This is not really nice. But we don't really ask ourselves, and we don't ask and demand from the public policies that they should provide a good life for everyone. And in a sense, and I have very similar notes to what Julia said, that they would provide dignity, security, and control. So it was kind of, I didn't have used the correct recognition, but I was kind of happy that we came to a very similar conclusion. So, what I think is very much needed in the public debate is the call for this shift of discourse or perspective in a way we are thinking about public policies. And this is one point. And on the other hand, there is this demand or need to regain trust from those who are not so well off in the society. I would be very careful when using some dichotomy of those losers or winners of globalization, because in a way, maybe highly skilled people are very much endangered by current development, whether they work in precarious jobs or they cannot afford housing. But their situation might be very different, for example, from Roma living in social excluded localities. So I would say those who are somehow not that well off in the society. So and what I wanted to speak most about is this question: why is it so hard? Why is it so hard to shift the discourse in a way if we are proposing something which should allow better life for everyone? And I think some of the points had been already mentioned here today or yesterday, is why there are not people on the streets already? Why there are so few people supporting it? And I would like to say a few points on this, and I would not speak that much about power asymmetry or economic power, because I think there are, from my people who know far more about it, and also from my point of perspective as an anthropologist, I would like to say a few points. Why is it so hard to get people involved, and why maybe they are so afraid of ecological change, or they have distrust in organizations which are promoting or pushing towards change of the society? And I think there's this very... So why is this I think Ondřej Slačák mentioned it yesterday, that there is this understanding that climate-friendly policies are a luxury for rich countries. So where does this pre-understanding come from, and how to overcome it? And so I think it's very important to be aware that there's a large proportion of society which is impacted by insecurity, which is linked and produced by the global capitalism, which has a very unequal regional and social impact. And when I speak about this insecurity, it's not only about the economic insecurity. When we speak about precarization, low wages, insecure jobs, but overall level of insecurity, which is very much more pronounced, and I very much see it in my research, in those regions which used to be developed or developing or well off maybe in the second half of the 20th century. I'm speaking about post-industrial, the industrialized regions, and when the insecurity is also about losing control about one's life and about the milieu where the people live. So when I do research in these regions, I'm speaking in the Czech context, in particular about North Bohemia and North Moravia, but we can also see it in like so-called inner periphery and other places, is this perception that those who are more educated or more have higher capacities to shape the place or change the place into better are moving, and those who are leaving are only those who are worst off. And particularly then we see the Roma coming in because of the empty housing capacities. And there is this perception of lack of control over the changes in the localities, and also degradation or this destruction of the local community. So there's this increased perception of insecurity, which has more to do with knowing my neighbors, feeling secure, and not only insecure on the level of criminality, but maybe on trust in the people around you, and believing that they can help you change the situation. I'm too long? It's okay. So now I'm getting to my point. So, what I believe that is, so these people who have been experiencing insecurity have also experience of several changes, and again speaking particularly about the context of the Czech Republic, so there's this post-1989 changes with rapid loss of job opportunity, but also the 2008-2014 economic crisis, where these people kind of felt left behind and being invisible. So there is on one level the experience of increasing security, and maybe I would like to emphasize this is not only about so-called periphery regional, least well-off regions. We can also see this insecurity in the large cities. But there is also, this is maybe on the level of lived experience, but on the other hand, there is this lack of discourse which would make this experience visible and make this experience legitimized. So when I do a lot of interviews with these people, they are usually when they explain their experience with over-indebtedness, low wages, unfunctional social system, they still tend to say, okay, and I had to try harder. Maybe I should have studied better. I should have done more. So they tend to, and there's this lack of discourse which would allow to step out of this individualizing framing of one's experience, lack of discourse which would allow to create somehow a way how to express this experience as, in a way which allow to connect to other people and which would also allow to step out of the stigma of poverty and failure. So this is like not being able to have sufficient economical income, even though you don't claim social benefit, is still perceived as a failure. I spoke with a woman who is working multiple precarious jobs. She's over-indebted net. She doesn't receive social support, but she said, okay, I don't have financial grammacy because my income is insufficient. At the end of the month, I don't have enough to cover my rent. And it was just like, there was no claim, okay, we should have affordable housing or we should have better jobs, but it's my failure that I am not able, it's my financial incapacity to cover my needs. So what I'm trying to emphasize to get to the point is like, on one hand, and I think we very much discuss it in different ways, we need to look for a framing which would say, the ecological transformation, which, as I would say, is frame or approach from the perspective of degrowth with all these measures which are connected to it, doesn't enhance the insecurity, but can provide a security. So what we are proposing is transformation which would bring the jobs back, restoring the community, bringing back people, which would provide full-time, accessible employment in the place where you live. So it would somehow provide not only counter-narrative, but push against this insecurity enhanced by capitalism, or global capitalism, or stakeholder capitalism, whatever, globalized. So this is one way, this is the answer which should react to very much real fears which are impacting large part of the population on the level of praxis. But we also need to look for ways how to provide a language and discourse, how to speak about this change, how to allow for a way to express this is not your fault in a way. This is why we came with the concept of minimum decent wage, minimální důstojná mzda in the Czech Republic. So it was in a way an attempt to step out of this framing, okay, we are fighting whether social assistance within the minimum income scheme should be 3,400 crowns or 3,450 crowns. So we are just struggling, or whether people who are facing wage savers should have 300 less or 300 more, which doesn't really change that much their situation, and which still stays in the struggle about, okay, we are defending those stigmatized poor, but we try to come with this concept of minimum decent wage as a way, okay, this is a positive, I understand this. We don't need exactly positive claim, but this is a claim which people can identify with and which they can ask. This is something we have a right to have and right to have access to. This is last example. When we when we were promoting the minimum decent wage, and we spoke with trade unions, and we spoke with some head of local trade union in some brewery in the Czech Republic, he told us that they were always fighting for higher wages. But at some point, they decided to use the decent wage framework. They said, we are not fighting only for higher wages, but we are fighting for decent wages. And in fact, they achieved a 10,000 rise of wages for some people at one point of time. And they said the whole atmosphere in the factory completely changed because the people felt secure. They felt they are not afraid anymore. They don't have to live in this substandard housing, and they can, and the relationship even with those who were with the management of the factory changed. So I think this is this completely shift in the frame. We don't fight anymore against this poverty people living on the street, but we fight and look for a way how to access dignity or full participation. And I would emphasize this, full participation and membership in the society, that people can feel that they are members of the society, they are full members of the society, and they can not only take things from the society, but they can also make claims because they are deserving members. They are not those who are failed and they should just somehow struggle to legitimize their existence even. Sorry.
Yes, and talking about full-time employment, work is often perceived as a need because you need to work to get money to access the other necessities of life. And at the same time, a lot of people don't have that, and on the other hand, a lot of people are overworked in our society, and it's getting pretty obvious that we also need to work less, in a sense, if we want to produce and consume less. So this is a puzzle to solve, and to tell us a little about how this puzzle is being discussed in the degrowth context, I will pass the word now to Ondřej.
Okay, thank you. Could I ask for the presentation as well? I only have one slide. Okay, this is the second slide. This is just the intro. No, this is the slide. Thanks. So yeah, okay. Maybe let's go to the first. No, how do I do it? Yeah. So yeah, this is how I called it. So I am very grateful for my four speakers to have introduced the concepts that I wanna maybe touch on now in a more specific context. So I wanna look at the old industrial regions because I think this is where we start. These regions are already partly degrowing, but not the way we would like to see, but rather degrowing what we call a disaster. So maybe this is the place where to start looking at the green transition and the possible alliances or even trade-offs between green growth and degrowth and, well, failed policies of the present state as well. So first of all, I would like to start by some of the blind spots of our economic and social system. First of all, commons and public. Our economics is a great system of accounting for private interests, private transactions, and singular people. But this does not add up to all of society or all of economy. And actually, I want to challenge the initial metaphor used by Joschka, which was that of a pie. I don't believe there is a pie that can be split up in a number of pieces or that can be kept by a single person. I want to propose the metaphor of a rave party where you could have all the parts that it's composed of. You could have your friends, you could have the drinks that you have there, you could have the music. Well, you can download the sets for free, but you don't get the rave party. It only exists there because all the other people are there. There is some common atmosphere. There is some, what we call an externality in economics, a positive externality of a good vibe that you can't really add up from the small private parts. So this is like my first concept, that we need to stop thinking of public or of commons as just a sum of private interests. And the other big blind spot of current economic system is that it fails to see how much resources is being used, how much energy is being used, and we just don't see it in our concept of productivity. We are super productive, but in fact, we are wasting a lot of resources to be so productive, which is a paradox, and it is certainly a failure of the economic system. But make no mistake, this question is essentially economic. We need to make do with limited resources, and we need to satisfy as much of our needs or make as happy or well-off society as possible within those boundaries. And this is an economic system, and we need more economic tools to repair what is currently being overseen. Now for the dilemmas, and I'm now headed more towards these peripheral old industrial regions. When we look at the strategies for economic development or for improving the cities, we often see a big focus on competitiveness. This could be competitiveness on export markets. So we are trying to make new jobs so that people can produce something that is being exported, that is being asked for in other countries. For instance, we have lithium in northern Bohemia. Well, the stock of lithium is very high currently, so maybe we could actually mine it and export it, and some local people could have a job like this. However, we fail to see the local value. So maybe it will bring some environmental or social or other consequences locally. This is the next thing we will consider. It's not included within the first question of how to create jobs. Similarly, when we look at attractivity of cities, we compare them in the global market of tourists. Where do they travel? Do they travel to Prague? Do they travel to Brno? Do they travel to Paris? But we fail to see what it means for local people, because there is a clear trade-off. I live in Prague, and I would totally love Prague to be a little bit less attractive for tourists. It would definitely make my life better. And this is exactly, once again, something we don't see. These are some commons or some public goods that are there, and we implicitly expect them to exist, but we don't really measure them very well, and we can't compare them with the impacts of competitiveness. Connected to this, we have a lot of money for just transition, typically European Union money. But we have found that especially these peripheral regions have very low absorptive capacity. So we can't find a way of getting enough firms to come up with the transition projects or to spend the money well, which is a big paradox, because at the same time, the state and state institutions, but also basic services, are pretty much failing in these very regions. I want to refer to Stát v rozkladu, Failing State, written by some alarm journalist in Czech Republic, describing exactly this during the COVID crisis, how hard it hit these services. Now, typically we imagine solutions that are locked in the technological development worldview. So we were mining coal, okay, we will be mining lithium. Or we were producing electricity from coal, we will be producing clean electricity now. We were making cars, we will be making hydrogen cars. However, this fails to see other dimensions of the regional development that typically are connected to local value. Because as I tried to demonstrate on the lithium case, high tech very often will increase competitiveness, something that we see very well in economic numbers, but decrease local value or have local impacts that are rather negative. And finally, it is hard to talk about transformation because there is a lot of anger, there's a lot of frustration, and I think Lucia described very well some of the reasons for some of the insecurity or feeling unseen. And coming into this situation, it is very hard to make a meaningful participation, to make a meaningful deliberation, because people are just ventilating their frustration with the current state, and it is hard to start a conversation, especially the underfinanced institutions that exist in these regions or in our whole state are not capable of doing a proper participation process. So we need to reconcile these two, and maybe we need to channel the anger in a constructive way. So now, hard and soft data. I want to start with that. it is, again, what we can see and what we can put a number on. We know very well what's the wages, what's the average wage, what's the average consumption of a household. We know what the product is, but we don't know so well how are people happy with their housing, how are they happy with the environment, how they are happy with their city or their village. And we always consider first the hard data. Always when you read the strategies, they are first, okay, we need to ensure competitiveness, we need to ensure jobs, we need to ensure the hard things. And next we will consider, okay, we could have good governance as well. We could have better democracy index, we could have happier people, but that's only a second consideration. Now, it is partly because we don't have data for it, or the data is descriptive, qualitative, so to speak. And it's hard to reconcile these two together, especially when we look first at the economy. Now, quality of life is exactly such a concept. And we have some numerical indexes for quality of life, and I think they are a great start. Because I don't know about you, but I often cite them, and I know how imperfect and limited they are in their estimates, but they actually do the job of showing at least that there is something missing in the other data. And finally, social innovations are a way of reconciling the tech innovations and the post-tech innovations, finding again the cultural identity of the regions, looking for new ways of living together, of doing democracy together, of working together, of producing food, for example, of having agricultural communities. All these are social innovations, but they can also be connected to high-tech innovations. Maybe a new app will actually make this easier and will make it possible for people to come together. So I don't want to say we just need to get rid of tech, but I'm suggesting that more of this is considered there, which once again in Czech strategies isn't the case. They only see innovations as technical. So maybe these I will not go into much detail with, but it's just a few strategies that we could go for. I want to argue that even imperfect data is always helping us, even if it's stupid estimates with horrible methodology. It is a first step. Asking the people, if the state cannot do it, people from Reset did this in the regions, and they found out, for example, that people would actually be happy to have some of the money, some of the funds invested into landscape, into ecosystem services, which is wonderful. And I don't know how many people they asked, how representative this is, but we have at least something. We have at least some kind of data that we can use, and we can maybe start doing something and talk again with the people. Just opening the conversation is a great job. Yeah, in my presentation, I tried to go very concretely into specific regions to maybe adapt to the debate that was opened by Nina on the global scale. So I think we need both, and I think we need to keep doing this. Like, okay, on the global scale it means this, but in the small regions this is how the economy is failing them. And yeah, just a few sources I used that maybe if you're interested in reading more on that.
Thank you, Andrzej. Before going into the questions from the audience, I wanted to ask you one more question and perhaps a concise answer that will also provide space for you to react to some of what you have heard. I think we have nicely zoomed on how we talk about needs in a very material sense, and I started like that with the pie and stuff like that, but we've gone a lot. I think there has been this confluence of the contributions in terms of how people don't only need material things, but also dignity, security, control, and how trust is important, and how that we already had this yesterday, talking about how it's important to start with listening to the people. So the question is perhaps of how do we start again building these kinds of alliances that also perhaps dissolve this contradiction between the red and the green demands, And I will start with Nina, because I also wanted to give her space for the part on solutions.
Okay, you either want me to be concise or also present all those solutions. So first of all, thank you very much. I agree with what you all said, and I think it comes together very nicely to show those different perspectives. I think one of the most important points in the degrowth perspective is to say there is not one solution. It's not like China, there's no alternative, we have the one alternative. It's like Tamara, there are many awesome, realistic alternatives. And I think a lot of the time, the social and the Greens, or as the left, we fight about the best solution, and we talk about, is this the right solution, is this the right solution? I think that's the wrong way, and that doesn't help us to overcome our binding of the imaginaries. But let people try out. And maybe some people believe in the big change and global revolution, and some people believe in their small repair cafe, and that's, you know, it can come together. And so don't tell others to do your thing, but find people who like your thing and start doing it with them. I think that's really important. And I also, what you said in the last point, right? Think about on the abstract level, but obviously have concrete solution that connects to the lives of people, and don't tell them what all the others have to do, but what does it have to do with their life. And I think in that perspective, degrowth brings something together also, this quality of life and this this alienation which we have in capitalism. It's also true for the middle class, and it's also true for the upper class. I mean, so many people who actually profit the most from that system, they have a very sad life because it's very alienated, it's very oppressive of others. And so I don't think it's naive to bring that perspective in, but it's crucial to show our joint interests. And I think that's part of the problem. If we only talk about what the others do wrong and we don't find what they could also liberate if they have a new perspective, I think that's really important. And what you said earlier about finding a solution that talks to those who feel left behind and who are somewhere in the countryside and feel like decisions happen around them, I think that's a crucial point, and we had a small chat about it and also said, well, that's one of the basic points, that the right wing is on the rise, and there's so many nationalist ideas because they feed on those resentments, and they present easy solutions and say, oh yeah, it's those foreigners coming in, or it's that bad government or something like that. And I often wonder, what are the good solutions that we can propose that don't feed on the anger of other people, but on the anger towards those who exploit us really? And I would say, from a degrowth perspective, to talk to them about the value of work and say, okay, you want secure jobs here, but maybe that is not in the coal industry. What could be a perspective be like? And in Saxony, the state I live in Germany, we are phasing out of coal now, and there's a lot of money from the national level getting poured into structural changes. And there is like a single small project, but at a broad scale, there is no local democratic processes on what the people want to do with that money. And there's such a big chance, right? People could develop their region and say what kind of jobs they want to have, how they want to shape their ecosystem. And the thing that happened is that all the old train tracks, which still run on fossil fuels, they get electrified. That's the structural change we have. So yeah, maybe that's one of the problems, that on a state level, social and ecological politics come together so badly that the money which is there now for things like that from the European Union, from the national level, doesn't become the people's money. And I don't know what it's like here, but I mean, there's a lot of programs from the European Union on that. So maybe a good idea would be to think about, could we have democratic processes in local places on the development, how they want to create, in our terms, degrowth region, but in other terms for the local development, and think about the future they want to have there. And I'm sure that a lot of people know that their fossil jobs will not be something that leads us into the future, and they have a lot of good ideas on what we could create together, and it's not like we have to find them, but we can find it together.
Thanks. Julia, you also wanted to react to Lucia.
Yeah, I wanted, because some ideas got into my mind when Lucia was speaking, and again, it is about the topic of security, because in our organizing practice, we saw a direct connection between the house or insecurity in the home situation, in the housing and nationalism, and it turned out actually that tenants, people who are renting the flats, and who have short-term agreements for 1 year tend to be more nationalistic than the people who have long-term agreements, which means that the housing situation and security of housing situation is exchanged by the security of nationalism, basically. So there is like this inter-exchange of bad material condition for a good and easy understandable culture. You don't have security in your home, but you have security in your nation. And the question here is how we, and what we do propose from the position of the left. And I know that, okay, there is no easy solution, but I think in this case, politically, we must try to find it and try to propose, on the one hand, maybe some ideas of security on cultural level as well, which won't be nationalistic. But on the other hand, I think that we must go also directly into the material conditions and to propose simply more security of housing to the people by the means of banning, for example, short-term agreements or other means. Yeah, this is what I wanted to comment. Basically, when Lucia was speaking, that there is really a very strong connection between insecurity of housing and nationalist ideas. And thinking about, again, these needs of security and control over one's life is of highly importance, and they're very interconnected with basic needs and material needs. And in many cases, by covering material needs, some basic material needs, we also cover security and control over one's life, by means of which people are becoming actually less nationalistic.
Thanks. I now turn to Lucia.
I will try to be brief as well. We were speaking about listening to people. I think it's not only about listening, but about, and I would say, looking for different frames. I was first thinking to say, offering different frames, which is also, in a way, creates a power asymmetry, because then there are these people who are more educated who offer the frames, so it's more about co-creating. I participated in a very interesting meeting organized by people of Earth. I don't know if I say it correctly, but I spoke with people from Green Movement in France who said how they started to cooperate with the Yellow Vest movement and trade unions after Yellow Vest in France, and how it completely changed the way the Green Movement is framing the problem. So I think it's extremely important, and I'm kind of sorry, but I know how difficult it is that we have, I don't know, there are some trade union representative here or some people coming from this different working class or background perspective. So I think this is extremely important to search for not only listening, but really search for reframing, renaming the situation together. And one point I would re-emphasize, I already said it, but I think it's really important we spoke about the perception of control and security and the recognition or dignity. I think it's really important to really look for the ways how to allow people in different situations to have the perception they have the right to make claims and they have the right to participate in the public debates. And this really means, I think Julia might say a lot, but many of you also, from really the local level, how to create this capacity and ability and fight the fear to speak up from people from different backgrounds. So I think this is extremely important. Yeah.
Můžu, jestli
I think it's like we also need to look for different ways how to measure the social situation. So go beyond the existing data and what we are, so maybe speak, for example, about the housing, current housing crisis or energetic crisis, how different group of people, maybe even those who we are not used to think about as being in danger of the current situation, how they may be impacting it, how is it differently impacting people who are house owners, who are renters. So I think it's also very important.
I wanted to mention one specific labor policy, which also aims to provide security, and that is job guarantee. So guaranteeing people that there will be a job for them being paid around the minimum wage. It sounds like a top-down policy measure that is applied centrally, but at the same time, it allows for a lot of space locally for people to actually define what kind of jobs are needed in the neighborhood, in the environment. And if some constraints are made on not having exploitative work or not having environmentally damaging work, it can open up a lot of creativity in the local context, and it once again brings people to the table, asking them, okay, what do you need here? What could be improved? And it is in a way subsidizing the local development with paying for the work of people who live there, who will once again keep the money and spend it in their local community, and also will keep the fruit of their work, what they create, what they improve locally. So yeah, just throwing it in as a security sort of policy, improving people's the way they feel about their environment.
Thanks. We have a few more minutes for questions from the audience, and there is the back where you had the opportunity to add your questions during the panel debate. We have two here. First of them is what the degrowth visions could mean in municipal politics. The question is how to overcome the competition between political subjects ahead of the elections in the interests of some common vision of policies beneficial to the municipality. And there is also a second question, which is, what do you think about the trap we are in, that all decisions and everything in our lives is measured and decisions are only based on data, research and analysis? I think this already has been an issue in the debate. And there is a coda here, which is, do you think there might be other ways to base our decisions on that we do not see yet? So municipal politics and the trap of data. Whomever wants to...
Finally, my way to present my solutions that I'm having on my thing here. And then the second one I leave to you. So in Konzeptwerk, we work a lot with the idea of revolutionary reforms or revolutionary real politics, Realpolitik, this German word, or non-reformist reforms. So how can you find politics that you can actually talk about in the current system, but that lead you into a new system? So if you really put them in place, that would be a step beyond. There's like an utopian part of it. And I wouldn't say that we found all of them, but I think it's interesting to think on those terms. And so I'll name a few of them. One, it's very old and very normal one. It's like a social ecological tax reform. To say, obviously, we have to tax the rich, we have to tax wealth and inheritance, but we also have to tax ecological degradation, and we have to tax less on the lower part of the income classes and more on luxury consumption or consumption that is degrading and less on basic consumption. We need a working time reduction. So we have had this debate here, but I'm sure it's a big one in the degrowth debate as well. What is work? And when we talk about work, it's only the paid labor we have normally. And who does care work? Who does democratic work? Where do we have time for leisure? So how could we reduce working time while keeping the wages at the same level or even rising them for those who have too little? Then how could we create cities, starting from cities because it's harder on the countryside, which are car-free? How could that make up space for all of us and also for democratic use? So people could actually use those spaces without a car. how can we combine sufficiency in housing with reclaiming for housing and security for tenants? You mentioned the big campaign there is in Berlin about the reappropriation of housing. And in the debate, I don't know what's like here, but in Germany, often the isolating the houses is often left to be paid by the tenants and not the landlords. And so how could we can isolate the houses better to make them ready for climate change, but not do that by increasing the rents? So thinking about those solutions together. How about climate reparations? So the Global North doesn't pay enough for climate adaptation and mitigation to the Global South, but also not for colonialism and climate debt. So how can we think about climate reparations? Can there be social and climate just energy tariffs? The ones I was talking about that in order to avoid energy poverty, to say that there is a minimum that everyone can use, and then there's a lot of progressive taxes, so the more energy you use, the more you pay for it. And obviously land reforms in the agricultural sector and the degrowing of fossil-heavy industries, so arms industry, car industry, chemical industries, coal, etc., and an investment into the care sector. And obviously, every time I present this, it sounds so banal to me. It doesn't sound like, oh wow, this is our revolutionary program. But there is no government or no progressive party or big alliances proposing all of those, because it's either the social or the ecological, or we are too small, or we say in a different language, or we focus too much about reforms only within the system. And so actually, I think that could help to bring those often called alliances we talk about together.
Thanks.
Yeah, I wanted to add something on municipalism. There was a very nice author who was writing a lot about municipalism, democratic municipalism, whose name was Mure Bookchin. And there are some nice ideas which are coming also from his books, mainly, for example, that meaningful politics and meaningful political decision-making process could exist within particular limits of the cities. Cities cannot just endlessly grow, because the more they are getting, the less politics makes sense. So there is, again, if we perceive the self-limitation as something which is connected to autonomy, like Castoriadis was saying, then we must also understand that there are some limits where we can actually make politics in the big cities. It's very hard. And he was also writing that exactly in the big cities, he was calling it urban, and small cities, he was calling cities, just to make this difference between these megalomaniac super big cities, urban, and small, more democratic cities. He was telling that in urban process, political process is very technocratic, and within some limits of smaller political units, we can do more democratic decision-making process. And he was also emphasizing the idea that in super big capitalist cities, like we see today, like, I don't know, Moscow and London, they are simply becoming the machineries for production of capital, where people are losing, and politics in general, losing the control over the economic systems. And to have the city indeed democratic, we must have it on the contrary, we must have political control over the economic systems, not vice versa, which is going on in many capital cities today. Yeah, and maybe the last thing, which I think is nice, is important, he was comparing abundance and scarcity, and he was saying that abundance in the cities is connected to some ideas of freedom, like, for example, you can have guerrilla gardening, you can have some sort of trading on the streets of things that you have, or some sort of free exchange. But in nowadays cities, we can see that it's not really going on, because they are very strictly regulated. And indeed, maybe as Andrei was saying, the common spaces also for exchange or for trading are disappearing. And instead of these common spaces, what we see is some of private interests, some of private persons. So this is maybe some, like, not political solution, but some ideas from the nice American guy.
Okay. And perhaps some concluding remarks on the trap of measurement and data from Lucia and Andrei.
Okay. No, I just wanted to say, if you follow the debate about the social system, social benefit system, the data don't really play a big role in the Czech context. It's very much emotional debate, which is much shaped about some assumption of some imagination of the poor. So I would not overestimate the importance of data, which may serve to highlight maybe some problem at some point. But if you go into policy debate, usually the data are not that much important, which doesn't say that we need to look for a different way how to make people more engaged, because I believe there's, particularly when we speak people who are not that well off or not that educated, they don't feel represented in the data. So I think it goes again back to this, to looking for the ways how to get people involved, how to make them participate, and maybe how overcome our fears from getting into uncomfortable situations, speaking with people from a very different background who might be racist or might be anti-feminist. So I think it's a challenge for us who are sitting here maybe next time to not spend only time on conference, but maybe trying to support some local causes with people from very different backgrounds. So this is something I think will be kept emphasized here during the conference.
Yeah, I just wanted to react to the data question, because I feel like you are actually catching me red-handed, because I was doing kind of this. I was saying we need more data, and I didn't mean to get stuck in this data-driven quantitative world. I think it's a subversive potential in data. I think we can change policies, we can change how policymakers or economists are seeing the world just with some externalities estimates. Take the cost of European trading scheme emission permit for 1 ton of carbon. It is completely imperfect how we estimate the price. It is a horrible methodology, but yet it enabled us to have at least something, to at least put some number on it. And now worldwide it is seen that this has very specific concrete damage in other parts of the world. I think we need to do it a little bit more in a subversive way to change the policy. We don't need to get stuck in it. And you are totally right. We need to imagine a world where not everything is being quantified.
Thanks for that answer. It's getting us back to the same point as yesterday, listening to the people and maybe interpreting their stories, even if they cannot be quantified. And this is the end of our panel. I just wanted to also invite you to the workshops that you will have the opportunity to develop some of the ideas and topics that have been mentioned here in the workshops with some of our guests here. Ondřej and Martin will be talking about work in more detail. So if you want to learn more about the jobs guarantee, for example, go see Ondřej. Nina will be talking about degrowth and movements, and perhaps that's an answer to the question, where are the people that we want to mobilize for the change, and why are they not here, which Julia has posed. I'm not sure if Lucia is leading a workshop. No. So yeah, then I will also be leading a workshop on energy poverty and maybe talking a little about housing in connection to what Julia has said in the afternoon. And that's the end of our panel. Thank you very much all for your participation.
Thanks, Joseph, for the facilitation, and thanks to the interpreters for doing this so nicely, and all the people around who helped